smirking at me. Creepy man from my hometown. I'm an 18F and just left school and my hometown early this year. This is quite a long story but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. Last year I came across a really creepy dude. I first saw this guy walking home from school one day and he was standing out in front of his gate. He stopped me to talk to me and the first thing he said was, "You're so tall, do you model?" and stuff like that, which I thought was creepy for a 60-year-old man to say to a 17-year-old in school uniform. It got worse from there and he told me how beautiful he thinks blonde women are. I'm blonde. He said these things while staring at me intensely. I was so uncomfortable and had to get out of there, so I told him my dad was waiting for me at home and had to go, and I walked away as soon as possible. His house was right at the turn off to my street and he could see my house from his driveway. As I walked to my house and opened the front door, he was watching from his driveway the whole time. A few days later I was walking home again and I got halfway down the road and saw him standing at his gate again. I immediately said nope and turned around. I took a different route down another street and walked across a field to get home and completely avoid him. I walked home that way for the rest of the year. At the end of the year after I finished high school, I started working at a cafe over the summer in the main street of my town. I had completely forgot about the gate man until one day he walked in. He recognized me straight away and asked me what my name was. I told him a name similar sounding to my real name because I didn't want him to know my real name. He told me, "Now that I know you work here, I am coming in way more often," smirking at me. And he did. He came in almost every day I worked. He would sit directly across from the counter and just stare at me. He knew I noticed and it didn't bother him, he just kept staring. One morning he told me he was going across the road to the bank to get money out to tip me. I didn't want to talk to him, so once he had gone I went out the back to mop in the chiller and shut the door. I stayed out there for about 20 minutes and then when I closed the chiller door he was standing right behind it staring at me. I don't know how long he'd been standing there waiting for me to come out. I started seeing him around town a lot and got paranoid he was following me. I was so creeped out and uncomfortable at this point, so I told my manager, who just laughed and thought it was funny. She never did anything about it. He started coming in when I wasn't working asking where I was. My co-workers would just say, "She's not working today, we don't know where she is." He eventually worked out my real name. I told my dad and my boyfriend about it and they told me if he comes in again to ring them. I made sure to look at his name when I scanned his vaccination pass in case anything happened. He came in again the next day and he said to me, "It's cool you're going to my beauty school name and moving to my city name next year. I'll be sad to see you go." The creepy fucking thing about this is I never told him I was going there and I never would. I asked my co-workers if they told him and they all swear they didn't. I don't know how he found it out. Looking back, I should have gone to the cops, but I was worried I didn't have enough evidence and they wouldn't believe me. I'm safe now and have moved away, but I'm so glad nothing happened to me. I only live 2 hours away though and I go back there to see my family often, so I'm scared I'll run into him. I hope I never see that man again. Late night scare. I was 18 at the time and my best friend and I had just gotten back to my place after a rave. It was about 3 a.m. We came into the house very quietly as I was still living with my dad at the time. We're just hanging out in my room when we hear someone screaming, so I peek out the window to see what the hell is going on. As the screaming was extremely guttural, I see a woman wearing a big white t-shirt with her hair over her face screaming and walking down the block with no shoes. I ask my friend to look. We just look at each other wide-eyed and keep observing. She then grabs the sign for the public pool nearby and starts aggressively shaking it and continuing to scream. We considered if she needed help, but for real, this woman straight up looked like the Grudge and sounded like a witch from Left 4 Dead. We were scared as hell. She eventually leaves the sign crooked and walks off. This freaked both of us out at the time since we were really young, so we did nothing and I didn't want to wake up my dad and get in trouble. Now at 28 I wonder if she needed help or was from psychiatric hospital nearby. If I promised to be nothing but a perfect gentleman. A few years ago, I was finishing up my masters. One night, before a particularly horrid evening class, a friend from school and I decided we would grab some ice cream beforehand to help us get through the class. I picked her up from her apartment and we went to a Colston just down the street from the building where our class was. It was a busy, albeit small, strip of shops. We got our ice cream and came out to sit in my car to eat it as there was nowhere to sit outside. As we are walking back to the car, we hear a man call out from behind us and say, "Excuse me," in a somewhat panicked voice. We turn around and it's a man in a suit. He's probably in his 40s. The suit doesn't look like it fits him very well. He has no backpack or laptop bag, and he looks panicked and harried, but clear-eyed and fully aware of his surroundings. He says, "Do you girls know where the train station is? I am supposed to catch this train in 20 minutes." We tell him, yes, the train station is about a 10 minutes walk from where we were, and gave him directions. Now, mind you, we are in a very busy HCOL area, full of Ubers, lifts, and cabs, and we are in a busy parking lot where tons of people are coming and going. His walk, at a leisurely pace, would be 10 minutes, so he has plenty of time to get over there, and he wasn't out of shape at all, actually quite the opposite. We turn around to start walking to the car again as he said thanks, and it seemed like the conversation was over. The next thing we know, he's following us to the car, and when we turn around to see he's still there, he says, "Could you girls do me a favor? If I promise to be nothing but an upstanding gentleman, could you take me to the train station so I don't miss my train now? A few things don't add up here. This area we are in is known for all types of white-collar business, but everyone has a bag of some sort, especially if they're taking mass transit. Also, he looked out of place in the suit, and the way he asked us for the ride made our red flags go up. Why do you need to preface that you'll promise to be an upstanding gentleman if you are one?" While he was asking us about the train station and for the ride, several single men walked to their cars, got in and left, including one of the cars next to ours where we were standing. Why didn't he approach one of them? The whole situation felt off. My friend and I were definitely on the same page, and unlucky for this guy, we are both master's students in forensic psychology, so we're about to go to a class where we talk about people, mostly men, luring, raping, torturing and killing people in attempts for us, the students, to better understand their psychological mindsets. So, even more so than the average person, we are going to have our guard up about strangers approaching us. We unsurprisingly told him that sorry we couldn't help, we had to get to class and that he could grab an Uber lift cab quickly or walk, and we hoped he'd make it. Instead of just saying thanks and walking off, he hung his head very dramatically in defeat and said, "I should have known. If you were my daughters, I wouldn't have wanted you to give me a ride," and walked off in the opposite direction of where we told him the train was. I often think about this whole scenario. Maybe he was just late, and panicked, asked the first people he saw, got nervous about asking us and therefore asked poorly, but so many red flags piled on, and my friend and I both independently thought the situation was very odd when we talked about it afterwards. If he was up to some shady behavior, the audacity to try for two women at once in a busy parking lot in broad daylight was disturbing to say the least. Creepy encounters with my 8th grade teacher. I had a creep of a teacher in the 8th grade. I was 13 years old, 14 now. When I first started my 8th grade year, I saw that it was a graduation requirement to take this career class. I noticed on my schedule. However, I had no idea of who the teacher was, since they were not at orientation, although judging by the name I figured they were a female. After lunch I noticed this teacher walk in the class. It was a male. I thought he was attractive, and later discovered other girls did too. He was young, tan, and looked about 22-24. He walked up to our table and lo and behold, he was our 6th period teacher. As he went through the generic about me teacher stuff, I tried looking at him, but every time I did, we would lock eyes and I would quickly look away from embarrassment, nervousness. I have never been good at looking people in the eye, but this incident seemed strange to me, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just because I found him attractive, as most young girls do. Soon after more incidents arose, too much to name, so I will only explain the most vivid important of them. In my school, there is a cover system, where teachers cover for other teachers on their breaks. When this one incident happened, my choir teacher was absent, so you know who subbed for our class. While I sat in my chair, I could just feel the man's eyes burning a hole in my back. It was so weird, but I pretended I did not notice. That class period felt as though it were 2 hours long, instead of 45 minutes. All I could do was sit quietly, until the class period was over. The next major incident took place the week before Christmas break. There was a breakfast party for good students, and parents were welcome to come. Of course, my persistent mother insisted on coming. So now here's my mom, me, and the creepy teacher staring at us, and I was the only one who noticed. This particular incident creeped me out even more than the countless times he stared at me in class, because my mom was here. I could not wait until the party was over, until my mom would leave and I could be at peace of mind. This next incident might be the creepiest, by far. We were doing a project in class, mine was on a crystal business, and I raised my hand to ask for help. He came over to my desk, leaned in close, and as I told him the problems I was having with my project, it felt like he was sniffing, yes, sniffing my neck. He was talking in a very low voice, like to the point that it tickles one's neck. I was so disgusted and grossed out that this grown man was talking to me, a child, in this kind of voice, after I simply asked for help. I understand that sometimes I do not seem like a child, with the way I present myself, and from what I've been told my intense eyes, but this man knew better. It may even be the entire reason he became a teacher. After the day I vowed to avoid him as much as possible, I refused to be a victim of his sick intentions. Also, there are more stories I have about this man to tell, so there will possibly be an update of more stories. Something weird just happened. The other day I went to Target with my husband and my daughter. I went to go Halloween decor shopping, so when we got there I was eagerly walking to their seasonal section. My husband veered off into another aisle and I just continued walking by myself. A man came out of the aisle and kind of abruptly got my attention, waving around a spatula and saying, "Hey, I have a question for you." I said okay, and then he asked me, "What colors would you think a man should have in their kitchen? I've just got my first apartment and I'm not sure what to go with." He looks about 40 to me, so it struck me odd, but he seemed friendly enough, so I told him the black spatula he had in his hand seemed like a fine color. He then thanked me and introduced himself. I said it was nice meeting you, and he just stood there waiting for me to introduce myself. And, I felt pressured and I'm a socially really awkward people pleaser. I told him my first name and that was the end of the convo. Well, almost 2 days go by, and I just got a follow request from him and I'm really freaking weirded at RN. My husband is telling me it's my fault and I should have known better, and he is right. But I'm scared, being chased down by a white van. This experience isn't mine but was told to me by a friend. This encounter took place when she was 15. Her and another girl, also 15, were walking back home from a parade downtown around 2 a.m. Suddenly my friend turns around and is startled by a man walking behind them within arm's reach. The man apologized for scaring them and said it was an accident. He was a middle-aged white guy wearing nice business casual clothing. She shrugged it off thinking he had no ill intent. He continued walking with them while asking questions. The questions kept getting weirder and more specific to the point where he asked where they lived. At that point they had figured out something was iffy about him. He asked them if they wanted a ride home, which they declined, but he kept insisting and pushing harder. He told them his van was right across the street. Finally, he leaves. They continue to watch him while he gets into his van, hoping he'll just drive off. Instead, he turns around and does a U-turn, driving directly towards them. They are on a major street which is lit by streetlights, so they run into the neighborhood where it's dark and easier to hide from him. There is no one else out at this time, so it would have been easy for him to grab them and throw them in his van. Terrified, they ran into someone's backyard to hide and watched him circle the block looking for them. They waited there for a while until they were absolutely sure he was gone. Thankfully the bus stop was near them, so they made it home safely. I believe I was almost kidnapped at 12. This is something I don't talk about often because I don't want people to think I'm blowing nothing out of proportion, but it's something that has stuck with me for the last 14 years. My mom and I were at a grocery store after school. She had her back turned to grab something and an older guy, probably early mid-50s, saw me, locked eyes and made some pretty obscene sexual hand gestures towards me and started to motion for me to come to him. He wasn't far from us, maybe 20 feet or so. I started to cry and panic. I didn't know what to say to my mom, so we kept shopping for 10 minutes or so. He was down every aisle we were and she noticed we left, and my dad went down to the grocery store to try to find the dude. He didn't, and the management wouldn't let him see any security tapes anyway. Fast forward 2 hours later and I am at the movie theater with my friend and her parents. It's a busy Friday night, so the place is packed, and we see a movie that ended earlier than her parents' movie, so we are in the crowded lobby when I look across the room and lock eyes with the same man from the grocery store. He was sitting on a bench, eating popcorn and following me with his eyes. I told an employee, but they were some random teenager that told me to leave. Thankfully some couple there with their kids saw me visibly distressed and waited with me until my mom got there to get me. We called my dad and he said to drive around town and different places before going home in case he tried following us. I still wonder if he followed us from the grocery store. and my mom got there and talked to the theater manager. The guy hadn't bought a ticket and had been there for hours, claiming he was waiting for his son. So we go home later that night. My dad is on the sex offender registry local tours and asking me if any of the men on there looked familiar, and sure enough he was on there. I think Jay was almost kidnapped. So needs a bit of a backstory. Me, my mom and my dad were at a bookstore and I was so happy. I love reading, and while I was walking down the romance aisle and I picked up a book, November 9 by Colleen Hoover, and this woman came up behind me, late 20s, early 30s. I was looking at the back and she said that's a really good book. Next I went to look at murder mysteries and I picked up the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, and she kept trailing pretty close and grabbing the books I've picked up. I was alone, if you didn't catch that, and it was getting creepy. I had to be wandering for about 45 minutes before my parents found me and we paid. It still gives me the creeps thinking about it. Sorry about poor grammar punctuation, I don't write this long of stuff. Anyway, what do you think, IDK, if I almost got kidnapped or if she was just creepy?